Welcome to Prism, a podcast meant to inform and encourage church leaders. Here we'll cover every area of church life, from assimilation to personal care and everything in between. So regardless of the size, type, or location, Prism will be a guiding light for brighter churches everywhere. And now here's your host, Neal Scoggins.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Prism podcast. This is Neal Scoggins. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, we are in part two of the marriage. No, not any type of marriage, but a church marriage. And, well, not any type of church marriage, but you'll see. You'll see. The last episode, if you missed the marriage part one, go back and check it out. But here on the Prism podcast, we are talking about a phenomenon that actually happened in the city of Little Rock, Arkansas. Two churches that actually got married. The first episode, we talked to Bishop Stephen Arnold, and he shared his story of how he started and how he ended up meeting the leaders of Grace Church. And today we have Joshua Hurlburt. I call him Josh. Which
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
People always ask me, like, I don't hear it.
Yeah, well, we'll call him Jay. How about that?
There you go.
Jay, there you go. Josh, thanks for joining us on Prism. Prism is a podcast that really talks about all of the various nuances of churches, church plants, replants. But I believe that this conversation about a church merger / marriage is one that's pretty awesome. It started.
It's definitely unique. Yeah,
it is unique. And it's unique here in the city of Little Rock. So again, Prism podcast on the road. We're sitting in Josh's office, 30 stories high, looking over the city. Is this 30 stories?
It is not. It's two.
It's two. Okay. 2 stories, 30 stories.
But it is a great view. Yeah.
It is a great view. So Josh, tell me, you're not originally from Little Rock though, are you?
I am not. I'm a Memphian, born and raised in Memphis. The cultures aren't incredibly different though for me. There's obviously a bigness of the culture, a more aggressive culture in Memphis. So I've lived in Memphis. I did my master's degrees in Dallas and now Little Rock. Dallas was different for me. Like Dallas has a different culture. I felt odd there, but Little Rock has a very Memphian culture, and I think vice versa. There's not a lot of difference there.
Well, I never heard put like that. A Memphian culture.
Right.
That's cool. Yeah.
I don't know.
Population maybe similar.
I would say my guess is the population of
Memphis,
Memphis, I don't know, 4 times as large, 5?
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, if you're counting everything around, yeah.
Oh, yeah. All of Memphis. Yeah, that's cool. So you left Memphis, went to Dallas, left Dallas, ended up here in Little Rock.
In 07, right.
Yeah.
So I'm a year 16.
That's all.
Yeah.
Just 16. Came to Grace. Was it Grace Community Church or just Grace Church at the time? Grace Church at the time. Not as the senior pastor, but
as the youth pastor.
As the youth pastor. You were youth pastor from 2007 to
2000. I was a youth pastor for 5-6 years. I was the associate pastor for 2, and then I've been the head pastor for 8 or 9, however that adds up to 16.
Yeah, whatever that number is.
And then whatever I am now, right?
There you go.
Different church. So
yeah,
there we go.
That's it. So what brought about this merger marriage between? He's grinning because he's like, I have no idea. Yeah. So what started all of that? Was it something that you've always wanted to do? Is it something that you just said, hey, here's a great time. You picked up the phone. You saw Steve Arnold. You said, hey, I'm gonna call you. Come hang out. Right. How did that start?
Well, I think that is depending on which angle you're looking for. Those are both the answers. So if you're looking for like the event answer, it's my neighbor lived across the street. A guy named Brock Patterson was a pastor of a different church, and the Holy Spirit, I saw he had a need, so I walked over there, and just at that time, he was taking a phone call from Bishop Arnold, and that made that connection. So, you could say, for those of us of faith, I can say I saw God's hand in that entire. I just so happened to see my neighbor in need. I just so happened to not just go into my house, but actually go help them, and he just so happened to be making a phone call, and that person just so happened, so there's a lot of just so happens there. Yeah. So if you're looking for the event part, that's the answer to that.
Yeah.
But on the other side of it is, I think that the Lord has been working the long game in me, and in Bishop, in all these circumstances.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when we talk about what I'm thinking of right now is when people say, okay, Paul, for example, wrote the book of Ephesians. Did God write it or did Paul write it? And you say, well, yes, both, but God superseded, in this illustration, God superseded Paul in his experiences in his life and all this to write exactly, So the Lord, he had me grow up in Memphis to have a knowledge and a heart and feel the hurt of the tension between the black and white communities, to grow up in public school, to want to also be a follower and want to do something about drawing these two communities together, having an affinity for those type of things. And so I think the Lord in my life has been working the long game since I was born to get me, and he's been shaping that, but then, a couple of years ago that phone call made, and we all see God's hand in that as well.
Yeah. So is this something that you beforehand prayed about? Was this something that you just said, okay, God, however you want to do it? Was that like...
No, yeah, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
No, so there was, in the story, part of the lore of the story is when I became pastor of Grace Church, when they handed me the pastorate, I soon after that, it was an all-white church.
Okay.
I became very disinterested in continuing to be a pastor in an all-white church. I wanted to have a church of diversity.
Gotcha.
And so I sought out how do I do that? How do I make the change, right?
Gotcha.
And so we ended up, long story short, finding an African-American lady to start leading worship. She broke the color barrier, still at Grace United today, but broke the color barrier for us. And it was just hard sledding. And churches have done I've been all white or all black before, and let's hire some staff and let's do something. And it's hard sledding. And so I got to a point where I'd gone down that road long enough to where I was like, hey, Jesus, listen, this is hard. And what I said is, what I'd really like, so I had a prayer, a very specific prayer. I said, Father, what I'd really like for you to do is I would like for you to bring an African-American congregation, like a whole church, and I would like for you to move them to our building, move them into our building.
Wow.
So that my church and their church can become one. Because, number one, it's easier.
Yeah.
for me, right? Like,
right.
Instant boom. You got it.
Yeah, there you
go. Now figure it out. But also I knew it'd be unique. And so so part of the lore of the prayer though is that as a Christian leader, I know that, well, any leader knows this, like you can do things to manipulate a situation. You can tag people's ears, hey, and I decided that I was going to keep this prayer secret I didn't tell my elders, I didn't tell my wife, I didn't tell anybody. I just said, Lord, this is between me and you. Because if it happened, I wanted it to be from his hand and not mine. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so there was that prayer. Again, I think the Lord's kind of been building my heart. My wife would tell you that back in seminary, even before that, like I would speak about these things.
Now, for the record, I did ask her.
Right.
And she said, in seminary, you said this. You said, you know what? I can't just do. I want to pastor. I want to lead. I don't know if you even said I want to pastor. You said I want to be a part of.
Well, I think what I said back then, which is different. It's slightly different what's going on today. Is I said I could be the white guy in a black church. Like I could be that guy.
Yeah.
To begin to build that bridge. So with that prayer, I take the phone call from Bishop Arnold. And I don't know Bishop from any, I've never heard the name Bishop, right? I don't know who Bishop is. Of course, everyone in Little Rock does, except for me.
Except for you.
Right. So I'm like, yeah, I'll meet with whoever this person is. And he comes rolling in, you come rolling in.
Yeah. Because I didn't know.
Right.
I think I knew the church was here, but in my capacity,
you were playing the bouncer.
Like, yeah, right. I was. I was like, hey, who's this guy?
Who's this white crazy dude? And Al Rome rolls in,
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is probably within 2 meetings, and this is part of the joke now, but like I knew why y'all were here.
We had no clue.
Y'all didn't know why y'all were here.
Right.
But I was like, hey, and within 3-4 weeks, I'm like, I know this is going to sound crazy, but let me let you know why y'all are here.
Why you're here. But I'm going to tell you what's funny is that you didn't wait 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay.
As we were walking out, we were at the front door. And
I get excited.
Yeah, and you said, I don't want to lay this heavy burden on you.
Right.
But basically, I've been praying, this is way more than just a lease situation.
Yeah.
We're all going to be one.
Yeah.
It's like the guy telling the girl at the coffee shop, you're going to be my wife. Yeah. And she goes, yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
And so on September of 2022, and it went through kind of a long process, deliberate, not long as like just trudging through, but kind of a leadership process. People will ask, and I know that they want to know, what did you do on your end? What did you do from a leadership perspective and from prayer?
Right.
How did you set Grace Church up, or your leaders up, your elders, to prepare for this marriage? When you felt like, hey, here's somebody we want to get married. And let me just preface by saying, I think Bishop Arnold uses the word marriage instead of merger.
He does.
Because it's more spiritual, it's biblical.
It's a better word.
Yeah, and merger is more of a corporate kind of secular term. Yeah.
Right.
How did you prepare leadership for
Right. So when you're leading, these are, I have no newfangled, I'm not going to write a leadership book. It's never going to happen,
I don't know, you might.
It's basic leadership stuff. In any moving an organization, any good sermon, any good talk, you have to do 3 things. You have to define the problem. You have to, in our circles, you have to show how God, through the scriptures, solves said problem.
Yeah.
And then you have to apply the solution to your situation, right? So for me, this long process that you talked about for us began way before I ever met y'all. It's problem. When I took a 9 years ago problem, we have an all-white church, and for us, that's not a problem for everybody, but for us, it was a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. How do we solve said problem? We went through that process. So when you guys, the Lord drew you to us, we had, the good thing is the Lord, I believe, had established a problem in my world and in Bishop's world and in your world.
Yeah.
But, in my and Bishop's world that we couldn't solve on our own.
Right.
A lot of times, we know this, we don't like this, but a lot of times the Lord will intentionally make us uncomfortable because he wants us to move somewhere, and we would not move to said somewhere unless he made us uncomfortable. He has never made a mistake in his life.
Yeah, that's right.
So Bishop was in an uncomfortable place. I was in an uncomfortable place because the Lord wanted to do something. So not only do we have the spiritual problem, but we both had natural problems. The Lord said, we want you to come together. So, so as far as the actual coming together part, how do we lead out of that? The Lord builds us all differently. So if Bishop were here, he would say that he leads relationally.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
The bishop makes 25 phone calls before he eats breakfast.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Yeah. And 15 text messages.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. And he gathers people and delegates. I most naturally am a systematic leader.
Yeah.
So, in this marriage, my role was to be the guy who came up with, proposed, carried us through the changes. So I would say, here's the system I want to go through. Here's how we can process this. We got to start with theology. We've got to talk about ecclesiology. We have to talk about, all the things, all the ologies. Let's do this first. Let's do this second. This will take us 9 months, from beginning to end. Yeah. So I'm that guy. And so the Lord used those gifts for me to be able to carry the process through and be the guider of that.
Yeah. And it sounds like what you were doing all along is you made no bones about the fact that, regardless of where Grace Church was, whatever, that you were not a righteous indignant. I don't know what the term would be. You were like, you know what? We are not all that we can be, or we're not all that what God really wants us to be. Or as a leader, I'm not really seeing what God wants to do here. Would that be a true statement? Would that be a...
Absolutely. Yeah. We are, you and I talked about this just moments before this podcast. Ephesians chapter 6 says we're at war.
Yeah.
And we're not at war with the people around us.
Right.
But we're in the middle of a war, and racial reconciliation is a part of that. It's not the sum total of that.
Right.
There are many. That's why in an army, in any division, everyone has different jobs, and everyone has to fight their own battle. You can't do it, But part of the job that the Lord gave me as a dissatisfaction with where my church was, is the fact that the fact of Sunday morning, the whole classic idea that Sunday morning should not, and it still is.
It still is. Yeah.
It's 2023, and let me say it again. It is 2023, and Sunday morning churches are the most racially divided time of our week. How can the church... You got me on a soapbox. Right? We're like, come to Jesus, we have good news. And our culture, which wants to, rightly, going about it the wrong way, but rightly wants diversity. Yeah. In all things, looks at the division, inherited division of the churches and says, I don't see good news there. And so this is not everybody's fight, but it's our fight. Listen, it has never been, I'm telling you, it was so hard to do. It was very hard to do. Yeah. It was a lot of work, but I've been a part of a church for, on staff for 17, 18 years. It has never been easier to invite people to church. We have never had more people visiting. We have visitors all the time. They're sticking around. They're joining the church. Why? Because it is not confusing that we are living out the gospel. It is not confusing that we are fighting a portion of the good fight. And so we are seeing the fruits of our even preemptive, right? We're not even a year old, but seeing the fruits of that labor.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? Do you think that this was a good time? If you were going to advise somebody that they are in a church, just all black church, all white church, all Hispanic church, and of course, when you start dealing with the language barrier, that turns into something different, but that everybody speaks the same language and they're feeling that angst, they're feeling that call from God. As a leader, because a lot of people just jump ship, go plant a church and say, oh yeah, we're doing this.
Right.
You didn't do that.
No.
That was not, you didn't, which, that's, and in a culture where church planting is running rampant and all this other stuff, you didn't do that. How would you advise someone that says, you know what, God didn't call me to plant a church, but he wanted me to manifest this vision? How would you advise them? What would you, something practical you would tell them to do that you did and are continuing to do?
Okay.
And there's a whole bunch of questions in there.
There's a whole bunch of things. Okay, so practically, and man, this first practical step is going to sound like the most unpractical step, and it's going to sound like the most Christianese answer I could ever give.
I already know where you're going. Yeah, there you go.
So I'm sorry, but if I were to write a book on how to do this, chapter 1 would be prayer. It would be prayer. I don't apologize for that. Because the Lord, I couldn't do this. I could not have efforted it. Is that a word? Efforted it.
It is now.
Yes, it is now. I couldn't effort it. And if I did, one of the reasons, going back to the prayer thing, right? Why I kept it secret is because I thought, you know what? I'm a good enough leader. And I'm not proud of myself. I'm just saying I am.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a good enough leader where I could have met with another African American pastor, convinced him of the problem, convinced him to move his people to my church, tried to do this on my own, and it would have been a devastating thing because I would have done it on my own power.
Yeah, it'd have been a dud.
So I know it sounds dumb, but step 1 would be pray. Second one is, I'm going to get to something practical in a second, like more than practical.
But that is practical.
But step number 2 is simply this. When the Lord tells you to do something, do it. That's chapter 2.
Wow.
Chapter 2 is actually do it, right?
Yeah,
because I looked at my elders are great. It's a room of white dudes, all white dudes who have all been all white dudes.
Which miracles happen in that room?
Right.
I'm just
it did. And that's a different podcast. But you watch miracles happen, but you do it. So, I was able to go to my elder and say, listen, it's time for us to stop being an all-white church. And, okay. And then, step number 3 is, if you want to do this, is kind of backing up the way we talked about. Mm-hmm. As a leader, you have to define, you have to make the people that are following you uncomfortable with the norm that they're experiencing. Because they have to feel a dissonance between, make what's happening on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have to say, okay, where are we falling short as a church? And the Lord wants me to move here, and say, I don't know all the steps. I just know. And if you're following them and if you're following Jesus and they're following Jesus, then the Lord will bring a unity to your thought.
Yeah. John
chapter 17. A unity to your thought to where they will be uncomfortable and you'll be uncomfortable, and then you will be able to lead together to that next step. So
that's the book.
Those are the best. Those are the most interesting chapters of the book.
And that's it. Well, we're going to put that in the show notes. Those 3 points. Josh's future book is pray, do it, right, and be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Because once you get down to because I'll have the epilogue of here are all the fine details of everything, because that's what they want to.
Oh yeah.
What did we talk about? How did you process it? But that's easy compared to the waiting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It is
waiting to see the Lord move on your behalf.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the way you did it was, or just the way that it has transpired, Grace United just literally came about by literally following God. And there are a lot of things that, you and I would have comments about, well, this is going to be a major hiccup, but it wasn't, whatever this one thing was. Hey, what we thought was going to take 6 months took 2 meetings and, 2 weeks, and it's done. And then it's a kind of a fear thing, because you're like, God, you're really going to do this thing. So it's awesome.
Right.
It's kind of cool watching. If you, we're going to link the website to Grace United in the show notes as well, so you guys can check it out. Also, the potential Josh book on how to do it. We're going to put that on there. Josh, thank you so much for being. There is so much more that we could talk about and we could do. Obviously, all of that. Right. Yeah, but I just kind of wanted to give folks a snapshot of, listen, just walking in your calling, doing exactly what God has called you to do, and just really being comfortable being uncomfortable. You kind of laid that out.
There you go.
That's kind of cool. Hey, thanks again for joining us on the Prism Podcast. Prism Podcast is wherever podcasts are any platform that you decide to use. Go ahead and download. You can go ahead. We have an email address in the show notes as well. If you have any questions or want to just connect with us here at Prism, you can email us at the podcast here at Prism, shining a light of various churches. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Prism. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did, or even if you didn't, be sure to follow, like, and subscribe so you'll never miss one episode